Welcome back. This is the last vignette of our Week 8 online lecture series. In lecture 8.4, we are going to discuss the effects of the actions of the RBA, that is, changes in interest rates, on the real economy. The upshot of this lecture is that a rise in the interest rate affects planned aggregate expenditure in two ways. One, a rise in the interest rate reduces consumption. Two, a rise in the interest rate reduces investment expenditure. Both consumption and investment are components of planned aggregate expenditure. Therefore, a rise in the interest rate decreases planned aggregate expenditure. Of course, a decrease in the real interest rate will increase planned aggregate expenditure. So far, we have not introduced interest rate into our planned aggregate expenditure model. Our planned aggregate expenditure model is the PAE equals the consumption plus investment plus government plus net exports. With the RBA coming into the picture, we are going to introduce the interest rate. So the consumption now depends not only on disposable income, but on interest rate. The A here is a positive parameter which measures the sensitivity of consumption to interest rate. Then the planned investment also has interest rates, and the positive parameter B, which also measures the sensitivity of investment to interest rate. Now, with our two new functions, the consumption function and the planned investment function, the two equations, we now place them into the planned aggregate expenditure equation. And if we do that, we shall get the most beautiful equation so far yet. So this equation now, all we have taken away here is net exports, assuming net exports is equal to 0. This implies that a change in R now will shift our PAE model. So with our new beautiful equation, all we need to know is the parameters. So now suppose we have our consumption function to be equal to C equal to 640 plus 0.8 into the disposable income minus 400R, where A is equal to 400. And then we have our investment equation where B is equal to 600. We have government, we have exports, and then we have autonomous taxes. All we do is to substitute all of them into the PAE equation, C plus I plus G plus X. And once we do that, we see that we now have an equation that looks like this. So here, planned aggregate expenditure is equal to that and that. Now, this suggests that the multiplier here will still be 5. In other words, if we at equilibrium set everything equal, the multiplier will be 1 minus C. And here our C is equal to 1 minus 0.8, which hopefully will give us 5. Very neatly, our PAE model now, our equation is now this. This suggests that the autonomous expenditure has interest rate in it. In other words, we can draw this function this y 45-degree line, and this part here is 1 0 minus that is the autonomous part. Of course, we shall have our YE. So the exogenous component now has interest rate in the equation. So we can solve this. At equilibrium, we know that PAE is equal to YE, and therefore the left hand side becomes Y, and we solve that, and we see that the equilibrium would be equal to 4800. So even though the equation looks so beautiful, the solution is very simple once we substitute the numbers in. And we know the interest rate, we can actually determine the equilibrium. We know that the economy's equilibrium is 4,800. Now suppose that the potential output is 5,000, then the economy is experiencing a recessionary gap equal to 200. Now it is the objective of the RBA to decrease interest rates such that we close this recessionary gap. By how much should exogenous expenditure increase? We know that change in Y, that is the recessionary gap, divided by the exogenous expenditure equals to our multiplier. This implies that the change in Y, which is 200, divided by the exogenous, will be equal to 5, our multiplier. And this implies that the change in exogenous should be equal to 200 divided by 5, which is equal to 40. So the decrease in interest rates should be such that it increases exogenous expenditure by 40. Let's see how that works in our model. Diagrammatically, this is the picture of the economy we are experiencing. We are experiencing a recessionary gap here of 200, as this is the potential. And now we have to decrease the interest rate. And we have to decrease the interest rate in such a way that we increase exogenous output by 40. This implies that, let's shift this a little bit. This implies that we have 10 1 minus 1000 R, which is equal to 960. But now we have to add 40. So 10 minus that R should be equal to 960 plus 40, which will be equal to 1000. Okay, so we can now solve this equation. 1 minus equal to 1000. Okay, and this will solve to be equal to R would be equal to 10 divided by 1000, which is equal to 0.01. So the Reserve Bank will need to cut the interest rate to 1%. And by cutting it to 1%, it is able to shift exogenous expenditure. In other words, this will shift to shift that to PAE prime. And this point here is now equal to 1000, and the gap will be closed. This is a better picture drawn by the computer, but that is what we produced in the previous slide. On the contrary, if the economy were experiencing an expansionary gap of say 200, in other words, the potential is below 4,800 by 200, then we need to cut exogenous expenditure by 40. In that case, instead of adding the 40 to the exogenous component, which includes the interest rate, we actually deduct it. So 960 minus 40 will give us 920 plus 0.8y. That this will become our new PAE model. And we can then solve this, right? We can solve this equation. We can solve this equation to get the rise in interest rate. So basically the equation would become 1010 minus 1000 r will be equal to 920, right? And this will solve to be equal to 0.09. In other words, the RBA would have to increase interest rate to 9%. Diagrammatically, this is what happens. The rise in interest rate will decrease aggregate expenditure, right, by 40, and so that shifts the aggregate expenditure curve down, and gradually output would decrease until we come to the potential. So the RBA fights inflation by increasing the interest rate, and also combats a recession by decreasing the interest rate. This is the end. This is the end. Please complete your assignment. Especially if you are in the Monday class. Thank you.